Typically, when you and we hear pitter-patter of raindrops, it's a soothing and calming sound. For some people, they're up walking the floors all night, trying to figure out what they can salvage, worried whether or not that water is going to come in their homes or if they have to evacuate. Looks like the tide might be just coming back in. Hopefully, the hardest rain is over and we won't have to worry about this overflowing. If the tide is in, you have a torrential downpour that will affect the level of the creek, causing it to overflow. I refer to our community as an environmentally hazardous sandwich. The Eastwick community is the southernmost part of the city of Philadelphia. A very quiet, middle-class, predominantly African-American neighborhood. We are at the bottom of the watershed. We're at the convergence of two creeks. Water rolls downhill. You have water coming in at a very intense rate, filling people's homes up to 8 feet of water. Some people have been flooded up to 10 times.
I was first introduced to Eastwick in 2012 when there were some city council hearings and I was asked to testify on some of the impacts of flooding in the community. This is a community that suffered a whole bunch of injustices over time, starting with urban renewal, where a whole bunch of people, thousands of people, were moved out of the community with the promise that there would be a new town center built. That town center was never built. The design of communities really has a major impact on their ecological, social, cultural texture. And in a place like Eastwick, you can see that really viscerally in the fact that a lot of the flooding in Eastwick occurs from flows that come from an upstream watershed with a very different land use than the downstream. And so there's this relationship between upstream and downstream, which is really at the core, to, you might say, to a lot of the problems there. The types of infrastructure solutions that I'm interested in have multiple layers to them. Yes, they change a physical flow of a material, right? They might prevent water from going out of a creek bank. But to me, the more fundamental question is, where do we need to manage stormwater? How much stormwater do we need to manage? And why do we need to manage it? And that why is a social question, it's an ecological question, and it's an economic question. Unfortunately, flooding has become ubiquitous, and I'm working both in Eastwick and in Camden on flooding problems and the development of solutions. So you couldn't, because if you walked any direction, it got deep?
Exactly. So we was like literally, when the water came from above here, we just walked in the middle.
Had that ever happened before? Flooding in Eastwick has a whole set of local challenges, but I'm also working in Camden, where there's a different set of challenges. Camden's flooding problem has to do with a combination of factors. The city was built with a combined sewer system, so it combines wastewater and stormwater in the same pipe. The combined sewer system, because it can't convey all of those flows to the wastewater treatment plant, has these points called combined sewer overflows where it overtops into the river. One of the similarities between these two projects in Camden and Eastwick is that in both cases, what we're doing is working with the local community to find solutions. We're looking at where the water goes now, what the problems are associated with where the water goes, and how we can strategically either redirect the water or reorient the community in a way where you don't have these conflicts that were created by a history of sort of superimposing patterns of development on top of naturally flowing landscapes.
During most rainstorms, something like 70 times a year, this pipe overflows and sends combined sewage out to this area. We just had the opportunity to see a bald eagle fly overhead. So this is bald eagle foraging grounds, and it's the same place where 120 million gallons of sewage or so comes out on an annual basis. So what we're looking to do with Franco and Hasib is really a generational project. Maybe once every 100 years do you get to change the way a system works.
Look, how's the basement? Yeah, if it rains hard, drains can't handle it.
Yeah.
So the water comes up out of it.
How high does it get around here typically?
The alley gets flooded.
Yeah.
Especially that alley there. You can go swimming back there.
Does it smell like sewage?
After it stops.
When you have intense precipitation or a lot of precipitation, and in particular if it occurs during high tides, that water gets into the combined sewer system, the combined sewer system fills up, and you can have backups of combined sewage, which is a combination of rainwater but also domestic sewage and industrial waste, for example, anything that's down the sewer. That's where flooding in Camden becomes more than just a physical problem. It also becomes a public health problem. If we wanted to take some measurements to be able to report how much the flooding is it the alley where you would suggest we do the measurements?
That alleyway, because all in behind the houses, everybody has drains.
The first step in doing this type of work is engendering trust in the communities that you're working with, that you're really there to use your science to advance or ask questions that are relevant to them, not that are purely relevant to you.
We'll be shooting up like a geyser.
Like a geyser. It's
Like a geyser.
Look at that. Yeah, that's like...
Yeah, and there's gaps in the mortar, so it's probably not getting out.
The water.
But what's interesting is it's all because of the sewer system. It's, in other words, it's not coming
Yeah,
up, it's
no.
not flowing off the road in, it's coming up.
It's coming up out the sewer system. Whatever y'all can do to help, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, so right now we're working the idea is to translate
This
all
type
that
of
data
work
into
happens
actual
at
taking
the
action.
pleasure of folks who trust us. But you have to earn that trust by being in the right place and being willing to ask the right questions, even if those questions sometimes take you as a researcher outside of your comfort zone or outside of your realm of scientific expertise.
What a lot of people don't realize is that it's actually really hard to get good data on where it's flooding on the surface. So for years and years, we kind of had to limp along and do our best with very anecdotal kind of evidence. Some guy saying, oh yeah, Harrison and Fourth, like, yeah, it floods there a lot, is a lot different from what we're getting from Hasib and Dr. Montalto, which is hard data, which is like gold to us if we're trying to actually design effective civil engineering solutions.
Let's say a global model says, well, we predict 36 inches of water rise. Well, is it 12 inches here? Or is it 36 inches here? Or is it 54? The difference of 12 inches could be millions and millions of dollars in design and construction costs. So the model that Drexel is working on with us is very localized, literally just for this neighborhood.
This community of Kramer Hill is extremely flood prone. Sometimes this street floods and a lot of the other streets flood. And when that happens, you know, people can't get to work, they can't get to school, water comes into their houses, and it, you know, interferes with public transit. So what we're trying to do is put sensors around the neighborhood that will tell us when it floods and how deep it floods, and then we'll use that data to validate the model.
So these are the ultrasonic sensors. We use this to measure the flow along the streets. If these streets are flooding, then like these flow meters are going to help us like understand how much was the depth of the water.
If the model is accurately predicting the flooding, then we can use it to say building in more pumps capacity.
Yeah, more green infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right now, we have 2 sensors in this location. We have 18 more sensors. We'll be putting the sensors on those places where we are seeing these problems. So we try to look into actual reality within the ground and then comparing that one with our model results and see whether the model will give us the same result or no. I'm just playing the recent rainfall that happened on Friday. It was intense. The results more or less close and the errors not that high, then you become happy that, yeah, something is happening. But it looks like the model is performing well.
The model is really going to help us inform us in making the best decisions possible about how to spend the money. It's a highly expensive project. We really want to make sure that we're using the best science possible, and that's where Franco and Hasib and their team are really coming through for us.
The flooding challenge is difficult because not only have we modified landscapes in very dramatic ways, removed vegetation, removed floodplains, converted surfaces from permeable to impermeable, but of course precipitation patterns are changing in different ways. In 2016, I had some students who were interested in exploring flood risks in Philadelphia, and we set up a workshop in Eastwick with some of the local community members. And then these students developed some very conceptual ideas of how flooding might be reduced.
Call it divine intervention or whatever, but we were approached by Drexel University's climate lab, Dr. Franco Montalto, who was very interested, heard about our plight, and through their NOAA grant wanted to do some research.
It was very much inspired by the belief that locals know best, that local knowledge and local understanding of what's happening would be sort of like a guidepost towards what kinds of solutions could be implemented.
Yeah, now they had a focus group meeting yesterday. Residents were very focused on, hey, we need an evacuation plan. That seemed to be the most prevalent during that discussion. There's going to be more focus groups.
Evacuation plan. So I guess that's the question. Should we add questions about evacuation plan to the survey?
Drexel's role was to facilitate the community engagement piece and to make sure that what we were modeling was based on not what we thought would be useful for the community, but what the community actually wanted. We'll develop the physics, and then through the community engagement process, we would find out what the leading solutions were that the community had, and then we would put those into the model and use the model to test out the efficacy of these community-led options.
This will be a really good time to think about what we want to make sure we elevate as our core values as we assess these different options.
I'm visualizing that water coming this far from my house on just this week. Is there anything that you can help the Planet Streets as of now is what we're looking for?
Right.
Can we get some help so we can sleep when it rains?
Right.
Do they have a solution for that?
Not one that we're going to be implementing in the next several months. What would be helpful is if we could get to some of the longer term options that we're putting into the proposal, but I think we need a separate conversation about the interim.
Is it supposed to be about flooding, Corinne, or not?
Well, it is about flooding.
This meeting, wasn't it supposed to be about flooding?
Yes.
Okay.
It is, and we're trying to address multiple time horizons at one time. So I'm not talking right now about immediate flooding. But if that's what we want to talk about right now, then we can talk about that right now and not worry about the long-term stuff.
The flooding is not only economically disruptive, but it's a mental health issue. When they hear that it's going to rain or there's going to be a storm, people are concerned for their life.
This presentation is Steve Rochette from Army Corps of Engineers and his group. They're going to talk to you about what they're doing.
We have a study here in partnership with the Philly Water Department, looking at different alternatives to reduce flood risk. And we narrowed things down to two alternatives: acquisition, acquiring structures, and then the other is levee. But with the levee, there are challenges to include the possibility of making flooding worse in other areas.
How long would your study be?
I believe the latest status, Leo, is that we're hoping to have a plan identified in this calendar year, and then it does take several years at least to get to any kind of construction, if there is a recommended plan of something like a levee. So it does take time. Yes.
If we have flooding in the next 3 years, just be flooded until you figure it out? I don't understand that.
No, I understand the frustration with the process and the time. We do know that there's other things that people are doing to try to lower their risk, and we understand that. But for these studies and leading up to any kind of construction, if that does move forward, it just does take time, unfortunately.
We know that these long-term concerns are credible. However, we're in the midst of hurricane season, and we have some immediate needs. And they've been immediate since 1999. So these long-term solutions were probably on the table then. We haven't seen any movement.
Okay, it's like that. You don't even know that it's a creek. It's the overflow.
Right.
I stand on my front porch.
Right.
And we see the overflow so that we can go and run to tell the people to move their car.
That's another thing that could you do immediately would be just some kind of an alert system so that you know, hey, there's floods at Mount Moriah, upstream coming down, and it sends you a text message so you know to go move your car.
Excellent.
It takes such a toll on not just your emotional state, but your physical state, your spiritual state, and everything when you have to continually be worried about something you cannot control.
Whatever can be done to minimize those sort of risks and stressors on people is a way of I think, advancing restorative justice, helping people to feel that they're safe in the community that they call home. And I think currently many people do not feel that way.
The city has known that this community has flooded since the 1920s and has still not come up with any kind of a solution. If you look at urban renewal, back then it was really just a way of getting certain people out of communities. What it did was force segregation. It was a tool to force segregation. People of color would be moved out of places so that whites could move in. And then African Americans began to buy the homes. But what they were really buying were properties that were in harm's way, in the way of floodwaters, contaminated landfills, and homes that were sinking. And everybody turned their backs on these people.
So there are a number of strategies that are on the table for reducing flood risks in Eastwick. One of them involves building a barrier, essentially a levee along the side of Cobb's Creek. The other involves giving people money that they can use to go move somewhere else and their land becomes vacant. And then the third is this land swap concept. I started talking to Carolyn about the land swap idea, which she had and which for me made a whole lot of sense. This is a unique opportunity that is presented here in Eastwick because of the history of urban renewal.
This section is 128 acres. This was the last phase of what was to be the built-out development stemming from the urban renewal plan. Where we're standing here does not flood. It's just been a field of weeds.
There's vacant land that's city-owned that's at high elevation, and then there's low-lying land with buildings on it that floods regularly. So by simply moving the two, you could reduce flood risks and avoid one of the things that many people in the community would like to avoid, which is the need for people to have to move out of the community that they love and where they've raised their kids and their family.
There are elderly people that have already purchased their homes, not interested in moving. So if that's going to affect my decision, because I can't go if somebody else on the block doesn't want to, or maybe I don't want to. I like my neighbors.
Yes. Hello.
It's homes. It's
Right.
not just geography to us.
There are three principles that are very important to this community in resolving this issue. Safety first, non-displacement, and being made whole. Drexel began to do the modeling that would show what the viability of this land swap could be.
We know so many other projects all over the place, how hard it is to fight nature. But if you can move people within the community to an area that naturally won't flood, and then allow the water to come into the community in other ways, to me there was a lot of exciting stuff to talk about there.
What we know right now, that seems to be a very viable option and one of the options for consideration that is on the table.
My perspective is like, if the science we do isn't helping you, then what good is the science? Climate change is only going to make all of this worse.
Absolutely.
And you can't wait 20 years to like figure out
That's
how
right.
to deal with that. So to me, it's like been an opportunity to say, all right, do we know what we're talking about? Like, is this really useful stuff? If it is, let's put it to work.
As climate change comes, we know that more and more water will be inundating the system and actually preventing stormwater from getting out. And that's another thing that we really want to look at. Let's say the fix is $100 million. We don't want to design a $100 million fix for today's standards. We really want to design it for what's going to happen in 2050, 2070, and 2100.
I think we need to stop looking at problems as being divorced from their context. And I think we also need to stop looking at one problem at a time. We're mostly limited by our own creativity.
Hopefully what we'll be looking at is a built-out community consisting of climate-resilient homes that can set an example of what can be done to deal with and combat climate change or the impacts of climate change, and can serve as the template for the actions that the city will take for other communities. People who will not be displaced from the community, people who are safe, and people who are made whole, occupying those homes.
The community talks about this idea of restoration of justice, but then in ecological context, we talk about restoration of ecosystems. You know, if you can restore justice and restore landscapes in the same place, that's where resilience comes from.
We're not engineers, we're not planners, but because we are in harm's way, we have been forced into a position where we have to come up with our own viable solutions. I think we are at a point now where we're saying no more. No more. The time is now.